This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a system quietly changing its purpose while everyone is trained to look somewhere else. For years, you were told certain institutions exist to stand apart, to absorb pressure, to say no when power demands yes. That separation was never loud. It was procedural, boring by design. And now it is being tested not through laws rewritten, not through speeches, but through something far more effective. The suggestion that independence itself can be treated as defiance. And defiance can be investigated. Nothing dramatic happens at first. No alarms, no tanks, just questions, just probes, just the slow introduction of fear into jobs that once required insulation from it. If this feels abstract, stay with me, because the moment it becomes visible is the moment it's already late. What looks like isolated conflict is actually coordination, and what looks like accountability is becoming leverage. Let's walk forward carefully. What controls the system now is not law. It's not precedent. It's not even ideology. It's leverage. A system once designed to distribute authority is being reorganized around pressure points. Quiet ones, procedural ones. The most effective tool is no longer legislation. It's investigation. You don't need to win a case. You don't even need to prove one. You only need to open it, because once the threat of criminal scrutiny enters a room, independence becomes expensive. Careers bend, institutions hesitate. This is not chaos. It's administrative precision. The justice system still looks intact. The paperwork is filed. The spokespeople deny coordination. Everyone insists the process is normal. But normality is doing new work now. It's functioning as cover. And when enforcement power is perceived as selective, trust doesn't erode evenly. It collapses asymmetrically. First in silence, then in speed. This is how systems change without announcing themselves. And once you see what's actually exerting control, the next question becomes unavoidable. How long has this been happening without being named? There was a before, and it wasn't that long ago. Before, independence meant insulation. It meant that certain roles were deliberately boring, unresponsive to outrage, unmoved by pressure. Before, disagreement with power was not interpreted as hostility. It was assumed, built in. Now, that assumption is gone. The shift didn't arrive with an announcement. It arrived through repetition, through normalization. One investigation here, another inquiry there, always justified as routine, always framed as accountability, slow enough that each case could be debated on its own merits, thin enough that defenders were forced to argue details instead of patterns. And that's the danger of gradual change. It teaches people to fight each tree while the forest is being cleared. Institutions start asking a different question. Not what is correct, but what is survivable? That question changes behavior long before it changes outcomes. And by the time the outcomes shift, the behavior is already locked in. This is the moment where history usually pauses, not because nothing is happening, but because something irreversible is taking shape, and the next moment makes that shape visible. Then it crossed from abstract to undeniable. An independent economic official tasked with making decisions that deliberately ignore political pressure was suddenly facing a criminal probe. Not over corruption, not over personal enrichment, not over secret dealings, over testimony. Routine testimony about a building renovation, a process detail, a budget line, the kind of thing that normally disappears into footnotes. Except this time, it didn't. Because the accusation wasn't really about accuracy, it was about obedience. The message was subtle, but unmistakable. Your independence is now reviewable. Your judgment is now chargeable. The official responded publicly, calmly, directly. He said the threat itself was the point. That criminal scrutiny was being used to influence policy decisions that are supposed to be insulated from politics. That statement alone should have ended the matter. Instead, it clarified it, because the probe didn't need to succeed. It only needed to exist. If this feels technical, don't look away. This is the exact moment where systems tip quietly, procedurally. And if you're wondering why this particular target mattered so much, that answer explains everything that comes next. This is where the mechanism reveals itself. Power no longer moves through orders. It moves through exposure. The system works like this. An institution is allowed independence until that independence becomes inconvenient. At that point, oversight is redefined as suspicion. A probe is opened, not to establish guilt, but to establish vulnerability. From that moment on, every decision carries a shadow cost, not legal risk, personal risk. Who benefits from this arrangement is not mysterious. Those who want outcomes without accountability, those who understand that fear scales faster than law. Who absorbs the damage is equally clear. Institutions that were designed to resist pressure now internalize it. Officials begin to self-regulate, not based on evidence or mandate, but on survival. And the public rarely sees the trade being made because on paper, nothing has changed. Budgets still pass. Votes still happen. Statements still use the language of process. But inside the system, the incentive structure has inverted. Caution replaces independence. Silence replaces resistance. This is how coercion hides inside procedure. This is how power avoids fingerprints. And once this mechanism is understood, the next escalation is predictable because it's already in motion. Now the pace changes, the probes don't slow down. They multiply, different targets, same pattern. An allegation appears, thin, technical, defensible on paper. It doesn't matter because the headline lands before the facts. The uncertainty arrives before the explanation, and the damage happens before any resolution. Some cases collapse. Some are dismissed. Some quietly disappear. That's not failure. That's throughput. The objective is not conviction. It's contamination. Every investigation sends a signal outward to regulators, to appointees. To anyone watching, what happens when independence becomes inconvenient? And notice the timing. These actions don't happen in isolation. They run parallel to other escalations. Legal pressure here, physical force elsewhere. Different tools, same direction. What's remarkable is how quickly this starts to feel familiar. How fast the extraordinary becomes procedural. How easy it is to argue each case instead of confronting the pattern. By the time people realize what's happening, they're already asking the wrong question. Not why is this happening, but who's next? And that question, once it enters the system, does something irreversible because fear, once introduced, doesn't need to be enforced. It propagates, and it's about to reach you. Here is where it stops being abstract. Here is where it reaches you. Because when institutional independence collapses, the consequences don't stay in Washington. They surface in decisions that shape your life without asking your permission. Interest rates don't just move markets. They decide whether you can afford a home, whether your credit card balance shrinks or grows, whether layoffs feel inevitable or avoidable. When officials start calculating personal risk instead of public good, policy bends before you ever hear about it. Not dramatically. Incrementally, you don't get a warning. You get a quieter economy, tighter margins, fewer second chances. And you're told it's normal. Cyclical, out of anyone's control. This is how accountability is outsourced onto you. You absorb the instability while power experiments with pressure. If you're still watching, it's because you sense this isn't just another political fight. It's a structural one. Stay with me. Share this if you want others to see the pattern forming. Because the moment this system becomes invisible again, it accelerates. And what's happening next proves this was never contained to one country or one institution. What happens next doesn't respect borders because the institution under pressure isn't just national. It's a pillar in a global system that assumes credibility before coordination. Markets don't wait for verdicts. They price in doubt. When the independence of one central authority is questioned, others feel it immediately. Currencies wobble. Capital hesitates. Allies recalibrate risk. And they don't do it publicly. They do it quietly, through hedges, through exits, through contingency planning. What was once a stabilizing signal becomes noise. What was once predictable becomes conditional. The danger here isn't collapse, it's fragmentation. Because global systems don't break all at once, they desynchronize. One country starts treating independence as optional. Others start wondering if they should too, or if they need protection from the consequences. This is how pressure travels, not through speeches, through incentives. And once uncertainty spreads internationally, it feeds back inward. Higher volatility, higher costs, less room for error. At that point, the system isn't just reacting to power, it's amplifying it. And the question stops being whether this can be contained. It becomes whether anyone is still in control. From here, the future doesn't move in a straight line. It branches. There are three paths. The first is adjustment. Institutions absorb the pressure and quietly recalibrate. Independence remains on paper, but decisions narrow. Risk is avoided. Conflict is deferred. The system survives, but smaller, more cautious, less honest about why. The second path is erosion. Probes continue. Norms thin out. Each incident feels survivable on its own, until credibility becomes conditional. Until independence exists only when it's convenient, nothing breaks. Everything weakens. And then there is rupture. That path doesn't announce itself. It arrives when a line is crossed that can't be uncrossed. A decision reversed under pressure. A replacement made for loyalty. A market reaction that spirals faster than reassurance can catch up. No one chooses rupture. It emerges when adjustment and erosion go too far. Right now, all three paths are open. None of them have won. What matters is that the system is accelerating toward a decision point. And acceleration has a way of stripping away ambiguity. The final question isn't which path will happen. It's who will recognize the moment when choice disappears. Nothing about this ends cleanly. There is no closing argument where the system corrects itself and everyone goes home reassured. There is no single verdict that restores what was quietly traded away. What exists instead is a test that most people don't realize they're taking. A test of whether institutions can still say no. A test of whether law still constrains power or merely services it. A test of whether independence survives once it becomes inconvenient. The danger is not that this is visible. The danger is that it's becoming familiar. Because once people accept that investigations can function as warnings, the system no longer needs to threaten. It only needs to be remembered, and that memory will shape decisions long after this moment fades from headlines. If you're still here, it's because you know this isn't finished. It's unfolding. Stay with this. Follow what happens next. Because the next phase doesn't announce itself as a crisis. It arrives disguised as procedure, as normalcy, as nothing to see here. And by the time the consequences feel unavoidable, the mechanisms will already be in place. That's why this matters now. Not later, not after the next escalation. Watch closely. Ask harder questions. And don't assume the system will warn you before it changes you. Because history rarely does.